If you're a beginner at drawing trees or someone who has struggled drawing with trees, this is a great technique, but more importantly, a great way of thinking to learn. Trees often come across as difficult to draw because we fixate on outlines, on shapes. Instead of looking at the form and trying to draw the form with a tree, particularly a large tree with small leaves that are too small to draw individually, we have to consider the overall form. So you'll notice that I have not started by drawing an outline of the tree canopy, because if I look at my photo, that's not how it appears. It doesn't appear as a line. It appears as lots of little fine jagged points. And so when I get to the outer edge, to the silhouette edge of my tree, I'm going to try and reflect what I'm seeing in the marks I make. I prefer to think of making marks on my paper to capture the feel, the form of my subject, not drawing lines. And the overwhelming thing that we see in this tree is a contrast between shadow and shade and parts of the canopy that's in sunlight. Now, that's what we want to try and capture if we want to try and make our tree look real, look three-dimensional. And if we don't, we'll end up with a rather flat-looking tree. So I'm wanting to capture the sense that some parts come closer, some parts towards the side are rolling further away from me. But I also need to capture the form, and the form is highlighted by the sunlight and the shadows. Now, when we want to capture shadows with a pen using ink, usually hatching, placing lots of lines very close together is the way we do it. But notice I'm not scribbling. Resist the urge to scribble back and forth. That will still end up looking like scribble. We want our hatching, we want our dark areas to be controlled lines going back and forth. Now you're watching this at double speed, so if you want to see the actual speed I drew it at, then you can use that cog icon just to slow down to half speed for a bit of the video, and you'll still be able to understand the dialogue, but you will get a sense of how fast in life I was drawing. And I'm using a 0.3 millimeter pen. Now notice I've done a dotted line there to outline approximately where I think the outer edge of the tree is going to go, just to help guide me. But again, I don't do a solid line, and if any of those dots aren't quite in the right place, that won't be a problem because they're not going to be really obvious at the end. And as I do my marks now to capture the silhouette that I see for this particular tree, and of course every tree's silhouette is slightly different, so I need to observe carefully, I place it over the top and try and use as many of those dots as I can just to hide them a bit more. And so really what I'm trying to draw, rather than draw the leaves in sun, I'm really trying to draw the leaves in shadow. That really is my focus. I'm not looking for shapes, I'm looking for form. I want a sense of the three dimensions. It's not hard to draw realistic trees. We just have to resist the urge to draw the sort of trees we drew in our childhood, the way we drew them in our childhood, which is to start with lines that enclose the tree canopy, often in a cartoon-like circle or possibly in a cartoon Christmas tree effect of zigzags. It's really important we get all of these childhood cartoon images out of our mind. They're symbols for trees in reality, and we don't want to draw a symbol for a tree, we want to draw this tree. So we need to disconnect from all these childhood ways of really just capturing a symbol for a tree, and I want to look at this tree and draw this tree and capture the effect, the way the leaves, or in this case, this is a pine tree of some type, I think, the way the pine needles hang. So the important things to capture are the shadows and the edges of the shadows, because the edges of the shadows are formed by the way the needles hang, the way they stand up or hang down and or hang down. So the wonderful thing about a tree such as this, and many trees in general, is that once we've got the feel for the marks we're going to make and the way the silhouette edges look, they are quite forgiving for not having to be too exact. So we don't need to worry if it's not exactly the same as our reference, if our marks are capturing the way this particular tree looks. But as you can see, I continue to establish the new areas that I'm drawing by working the shadows in. And so I'm really looking at my reference photo and I'm seeing the shadows as shapes that I'm now drawing with my hatching lines back and forth, back and forth. And then within the parts of the tree canopy of the leaves, or the needles in this case, that are capturing sunlight, what I need to do then is to punch into that some smaller shadow areas. But that's where there's a real, I think, level of control needed to make them look random. Random is very difficult to do when we draw, because if we don't pay attention, we will end up filling every white space equally with little shadow areas that will end up looking like a pattern rather than realism. So I need to pay attention to that. And that's one of the things we can do at the end. Now, the part of the tree on the lower left, which is off the paper, I'm using what I see on the lower right-hand side to just create what could pass for that side of the tree. Now, this may feel that it's a bit too complex for beginners, but it's not. It is very simple. It is a very simple way to start drawing trees and to understand trees. And it wouldn't matter if this were an oak tree. If it were an oak tree, it would be the same thing, but there would be more gaps, perhaps, where we would catch glimpses of branches. And if it were an Australian gum tree, a tree I'm far more familiar with drawing, then there would be, if you like, clumps of foliage with lots of branches being visible between them. And again, it's looking at the individual tree I'm drawing and not thinking of cartoon trees or of quick ways to draw trees. There's no quick way to draw anything, really. It's the same process for everything. Observe, what am I drawing and what marks can I make to create the feel, create the visual effect of what I'm seeing. It's not that this is more difficult than doing lollipop trees, but it's a different way of thinking. And it's great if you're a beginner to start by using a method and training your mind to observe and then to translate those observations into marks that create the look, the feel, the effect of the particular tree that you're looking at. And 20 minutes to do a tree, I think, is a very reasonable amount of time. If this were a smaller part of a larger subject, then I would do it somewhat more simply than this. How much detail we put on anything does depend on the time we have to spend, but it also depends on its part in the overall scene, in the overall subject. But it's great to do some trees sometimes as specimens, as really examples, because if we then do different types of trees, it will really push us to develop our observation, our ability to see the way that particular tree catches the light and casts shadows and looks and the overall shape that the branches form and so forth, and then to work out what marks will capture that. And of course, it also depends on how far we are from a tree. Sometimes with a tree, we can start to see some individual leaves, particularly in the silhouettes, but at other times we can't, and we need to avoid any mark that looks like a leaf, because that will in the end make the tree feel a lot smaller than it really is. If we can't see any individual leaves, we don't want to suggest them. And of course, if it's very different looking trees, such as palm trees, it's a totally different shape and feel again. But the technique is the same. We observe carefully, we pay attention to the silhouette edges, and we draw marks, not lines, to capture the feel of that silhouette edge. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope you found this helpful. I hope you don't think, oh, that's too hard for me. This is a great technique to start learning when we start drawing. And then as we build in experience, we build in experience with a technique that will take us right through to professional looking trees in our drawings. And if you're interested, I do have a trees playlist with lots of different types of trees. But look, whatever you draw, however you draw it, trees or something else, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.